Welcome back, guys, to another Slakker Porsche podcast. I am your host, Ricardo Ulloa, but I'm not by myself. I do have with me the engine whisperer himself, Brandon Clark. Brandon, how are you today?
Doing great. Glad to be back after it.
Yeah, it's definitely been a long pause. There's been a lot that's happened this month. Is there anything that has stood out to you in this past month that we haven't recorded that's pretty significant, pretty exciting to share?
Well, I think we've recorded all the big stuff. Super excited about hitting 896 on the 997 turbo build.
Okay.
896 and 774. It was nice to see that one come together. Also has me super excited about the 1400 horsepower build that we've got in the mix right now. Looking forward to seeing that come. You know, the 896 shook the dyno room pretty good when we were really letting it loose, and so I'm a little nervous about the bigger engine just from that perspective, but I usually am, so that's not a big deal.
Yeah, were you pretty nervous when you were dynoing the 896?
I think that probably came through in the video. It was a lot of power. Like, you could feel that power throughout the room, throughout the building for that matter. But it was pretty tame. Everything stayed, well within limits, and we didn't have anything of true concern other than just, a little bit of nerves was all.
Yeah, and as the editor, I did see that you guys made it to 26.5 pounds, but could we have done more?
So we actually believe we were limited by the wastegate spring on that one. We were shooting for 28, was what kind of our target was, and so that would have gotten us over that 900 mark, but we were pretty happy with the results as it was, and so we called it a win and took it. The one we've got coming up is targeting 45 PSI.
Wow.
And so, by some standards, that's still considered low boost. Obviously, for us, that's going to be a monster, so it's going to be a lot of fun. Yeah,
I mean, being so new to kind of, I guess, the industry and seeing what we have done, and now seeing the 896, it kind of, I don't want to say that it's ruined my perspective on everything else, because seeing the 3s and the 400s is really impressive, but after being in the ballpark with an 800, it really makes you kind of, change your perspective a little bit.
Yeah. NA is an art and always will be. Boost just kind of throws all that out the window.
Definitely.
And, but it's as we've done that, the interesting thing is we've consistently see the gains that we make on an engine NA translate over to the boosted side as well. So it's good to see that the boost isn't just washing that out. And so essentially at the end of the day, if we make an engine more efficient, which is where we're getting those gains in A, that's going to translate to making a better boosted engine as well. So
I see. Well, I think this is a good time to transition into some questions. What do you say?
Let's go for it.
Okay. This one comes from Joseph at Potter. So, baby GT3, are there plans for a high-revving 4.2 M97, almost like a budget GT3? This is a fun question.
Yes, I love this question. So, conservative estimates have it at less than 10,000 996 and 997 GT3s in the U.S., whereas there's well over 70,000 911s. And mind you, this is essentially on the C2s. This is the same chassis as a GT3, or on the C4Ss, which are the wide body and have the sexier hips on them. So the concept of making a GT3 class car or better from the street versions of the 996s and 997s is right near and dear to my heart. And as somebody that's always had a 996 or a 987, it's what do I do to make more power? You buy a GT3. Well, those are becoming 2, 3, 4 times more expensive these days. And one, it's not practical, but two, I don't want a GT3. I've always loved my 996s. Really, that's core to our existence, is continuing to push and drive the 99 through 08 platforms and see, how close we can get to that or even further. Now then on some of our boosted builds, obviously with the turbos and the superchargers, we've been able to pass that up. But really, I mean, the sweet spot is there's nothing that feels better than a high horsepower NA high-revving engine. And so, yeah, that's definitely the ultimate goal. We're really close, I feel like, with our 4.1 liter builds, so getting in that 420 to 425 range. The 996 GT3s are rated at 380, but because of how they're rated, that comes in kind of less than what we're doing. That rating has to have, accessories on and air conditioning, and they have all these standards that they have to invoke whenever they're publishing their horsepower numbers. So I feel like a 380 on a GT3, our 420 is going to be pretty close or equivalent, maybe just a hair more, but kind of in that same ballpark. And then the 415 on the 997 GT3s, we're going to have to work just a little bit harder than what we're doing to get there. But that being said, we already have the design in place, the ball is rolling, and we're actually low-key taking a few deposits on 3 high-revving 4.5 liter engines that we're going to start building in the next 6 months. And so we've already got the parts on order and they're being made, and there's some long lead times on some of them, but we're gonna roll 3 of those out and see how that goes.
4.5 sounds insane.
4.5 liter, 8,000, 8,200 RPM. It should be a ton of fun.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I can't even imagine that, honestly. That's crazy. Wow. Do you think the work that we do will eventually translate into the value of these cars? The market?
And that's a great question. And once again, near and dear to my heart, in that, the 996s and 997s have always kind of been the black sheep of the Porsche family as far as the 911s go, with the air-cooled being, so cool and so pricey, and the, 09, there's a big jump up in price. And really, there was some incredible developments on these cars. I mean, it was the first VarioCam and VarioRam cars. Those were introduced on the 996.1, and really they kind of perfected the VarioCam on the 996.2 when they took it from a on-off to a phased approach. And it gives it this flat torque curve that hopefully people see on our dyno charts, that is really unique, especially for that error to get on an engine like this. It was very cutting edge. And so there have been some very well publicized, very heavily advertised flaws in these engines that I feel like have given it an unfair reputation. However, as we continue to rebuild more and more of them, essentially eliminating those design flaws, being able to highlight what's so great about these engines and build on them, I do think there's a tipping point to where, I don't know if it's when we've done 1,000 engines, 2,000, 5,000, I don't know what that is, but at some point, at some percentage of the market, people will take notice and go, oh, hey, this is as good, if not better than a GT3. And when people drive them side by side, and they
and they don't know, then they find out.
Well, either they find out, or they, if we're revving a little higher and we're, pushing a little harder, and I think there's a real opportunity to maybe, make a difference in how these models are viewed, for sure.
Yeah, because I joke about it all the time. I would love a Porsche, and what would be the easiest way for me to get to a Porsche affordably with a reliable engine than just getting one that doesn't have an engine and then putting a Slakker engine in it, and then you have the reliability, you got the power, at an affordable rate if you're looking at just getting one like that way. So yeah, it seems like the way to go.
I felt from the beginning that, when you take what Porsche, did and combine in, Hartek's brilliant technology that we've then expanded on, continued to develop upon, and combine that together, it's a driving experience like no other that can't be matched for that price level. I mean, you can get more horsepower, you can get different features, maybe more comfort, but there's just something about, the analog feel, like it's comfortable, but you feel the road, and You know, the rear engine design is, I mean, best I've heard is it's bad engineering that Porsche perfected, and there's just nothing else like it.
Yeah, taking lemons and making lemonade.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Nice. Okay, let's jump into the next question. This one comes from Ron Vanner, 5359. I had a Slakker rebuild 3.6 to 4.1. If something were to happen to my ECU, should I order a new one from Slakker with a 4.1 liter parameter entered, or would I have to send the car back to Slakker to have an ECU updated? Or could I update the ECU myself with the parameters provided by Slakker?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So one of the big advantages that we have when we get the ECU in here is we can actually throw it on the bench and download all the files we need to off of it to make an exact clone of it. So at that point, we're able to buy a used ECU off of, you know, either a new one from Porsche or a used one off of eBay, any of that same model of ECU, and essentially copy the files over and make an exact duplicate of the one that we sent out with the engine. And so it's a pretty economical backup plan to be able to replace an ECU if it was damaged.
Okay.
Just shoot us an email, and you know, it generally wouldn't take but a few days for us to, if we didn't have the ECU, to get it in, go ahead and clone his existing ECU that was damaged and send him the clone out. And yeah,
pretty easy, huh?
Yeah, that expensive. Definitely less expensive than buying one from a dealer.
Oh, well, there you go. Nice. Next question.
Yeah.
Next question comes from Steve Reno, 6799. He asks, just curious, Brandon, do you install or recommend installing a lightweight flywheel on the 9971S 3.8 liter stock motor? I'm replacing the clutch soon, and I'm tempted to go with the lightweight flywheel.
So the answer is yes. We love the ASCO lightweight flywheels specifically. Very high quality, well made. They come in well balanced. And really, I think this is a good time to get a little show and tell. Let's take a look at some flywheels, shall we?
My favorite part of the podcast.
All right,
let's
go. Here we have the ASCO lightweight flywheel, and we have the Porsche dual mass flywheel. Now, Ricardo, you helped pull them out. What did you notice different between the two?
100% that the lightweight flywheel was lighter than the other one.
Just
but
like
it was
the name
significantly,
says, right?
It was significantly lighter.
So this big old sucker weighs 40 pounds. And then it's got a spring built into it. Let's see if we could show a little bit of the spring action. And so what that is it's a dampener to dampen some of the engine vibration and keep it from going into the drivetrain. And it just makes a little more smoother, more comfortable ride. The downside is that it also makes the revving a little bit more muted, if you will. And so it's slower to, if I have the clutch in and I'm hitting the gas pedal or the throttle pedal, then it's going to rev a little bit slower and it's going to come down a little bit slower. Like everything's a little muted. And so that's fine. It makes for a nice, comfortable ride. I don't have anything against this. This is a great option. And you're not going to see any more power out of a lightweight flywheel. It doesn't really affect the horsepower. It just affects the responsiveness of the throttle pedal. Now then, being somebody that really likes responsiveness, I do personally prefer the lightweight flywheel on all of my Porsches and have it on pretty much all of my Porsches. I've got one left that I need to get one on. So the biggest difference obviously is the weight. This one's 40 pounds. This is 14 pounds.
Oh, wow.
And so it's nice and light and easy. This does not have any type of built-in dampening or spring in it. And so some people run it with the Sachs Performance sprung clutch. I typically just run it with the Sachs OEM clutch. The OEM clutch is good up to 395, about 390 foot-pounds of torque. And that's still going to be good enough that if it gets hit too hard, there's going to be some slip and give, and so it's not going to go directly into the drivetrain. The one with the sprung clutch is going to feel a little different on engagement and provide a little bit of dampening force there, but ultimately, we've done a lot of research and a lot of in-depth failure analysis of broken crankshafts and what causes that. And we know that comes from typically rear-end impacts causing that crankshaft to bow between the flywheel and the center thrust bearings. They are not from torsional loads or vibration or hits as maybe kind of previously thought. So, that's kind of the science behind why we're really, happy with the lightweight flywheels. And then beyond that, what I love about the ASCO in particular is this wear surface right here is replaceable. So for under $100, if you're servicing the clutch another 100,000 miles from now, you don't have to replace the entire flywheel again. You can simply replace the friction ring. I also like that it comes with a torque plate. It allows us to, if we use this torque plate, we just have to torque the bolts down to about 60 foot-pounds, I believe. And so it's a nice setup. It's well done. It's well thought out. There is a little bit of noise that goes along with it. It's not a box of rocks grinding noise like on some vehicles, but you can definitely kind of hear a little bit of chatter to go with it. Many people, that sounds perfectly natural, just part of the experience, and is well worth kind of the extra, responsiveness that they feel whenever they have one of these. So we like both options. We offer both options. Both options are about the same price. So it just comes down to whatever our customer's preference is.
And this is the ASCO flywheel, lightweight flywheel.
Yep.
Nice. Okay. That sums up that question.
Yeah.
Let's move on to the next one.
All right.
I have this one coming from Kuba S. It goes, where is the best place to install an aftermarket oil temperature, sump, cylinder head, and oil pressure sensor? And then he has a second question. What do you think about the low temperature thermostat in these engines?
Okay. So it's really three questions. Oil temp sensor, oil pressure sensor, and then the low temp thermostat. And all three are good questions. So the factory oil temp sensor is actually built into the oil level sensor. The sump really is the right place to measure oil temp. That's after it's been returned from the engine and hasn't gone back through the oil cooler yet. And so that's kind of the right place to measure it. The oil temperature measured by the engine is actually available on the CAN bus of most of the 996 and all the 997 models. And so that's one way to get that data without a external sensor. And we've looked at that data quite a bit in comparison to an aftermarket sensor, and we found it to be really good. The oil pressure sensor, on the other hand, the best place to put that's going to be at the top of the heads. We've done a lot of data logging with oil pressure sensors at the filter, and the advantage of that is it's immediately after the oil pump. So when we were doing testing of various sumps, various oils, various oil levels, that kind of eliminated a lot of the other factors that happen after that and just let us see where was the engine sucking air and losing pressure coming directly after the pump. And so that's why we measured it there for a lot of our testing. But the end result's what I really want to see when I'm looking at oil pressure data for an engine after it's been through, the heads and essentially the crankshaft and bearings. And so there are two ports, one on each bank, on top of the valve covers. Now then the OEM oil pressure sensor is on there. For the Caymans, it's actually an oil pressure switch for the Cayman and Boxsters. The 911s have an oil pressure sensor, and that can be read either on some of the dashes, have an oil pressure gauge on it. It can actually, the Cayman can be replaced with that 997, 996 oil pressure sensor, and that can be routed into the ECU, a little more complicated, or that can be replaced either on that bank or have another oil pressure sensor added on the other bank in order to get oil pressure data at the top of the heads. And so that's really the right place to do it. The ECU does not use oil pressure for any of its calculations or any of its maps, so it is okay to replace that OEM sensor with an aftermarket sensor if you're wanting to get that data elsewise. Otherwise, if you have a low profile sensor, especially on the Caymans, there's limited room on the other side, but you can add a aftermarket sensor. And typically we use 1/8 inch NPT sensors, and the size of the plug is an M14 by 1.5. And so if there's an M14 by 1.5 adapter to an 1/8 inch NPT, that's what's required to read that information or to adapt an aftermarket oil pressure sensor to the heads.
Did we answer the
So, and then lastly comes to the low-temp thermostat. And so we do use a low-temp thermostat on all of our builds. Now then, what does the thermostat even do? Well, maybe we should get a block and kind of see how that works.
Let's do that.
So essentially, I thought it might be kind of fun to use this as a chance just to kind of look and say, okay, how does a thermostat even work and what does it do? And so this is essentially the inlet from the radiators where the water has cycled through the radiators, cooled off, and is coming back to the engine. And then the thermostat itself is this piece right here. You can see there's a spring and like a little plunger thing. And so this sets down against there and blocks or prevents the water from coming back from the radiators. Whether we've got water coming back from the radiators or not, the water pump, which goes here, still needs to be able to pump water through the engine. And so there's actually a bypass that comes through here that is just circling the same water through the engine, allowing it to gain temperature as it goes. So if you look, this right here is actually filled with wax. And so as the water temperature heats up, that wax begins to melt and allows this valve to open and the water to flow through from the radiators. So essentially the only difference between a low temp and a regular temp thermostat is how early this opens up and allows the cooler water from the radiators to start circulating through the engine as opposed to just recirculating the water from the engine itself. Let's talk about what advantage is there for that to happen earlier. So essentially how Porsche designed these engines is with an 83 degrees Celsius thermostat. And so what that means is the thermostat's going to open at somewhere around 181 degrees Fahrenheit. It'll start opening and be completely open by about 185 degrees Fahrenheit. And so at that point, probably going to have a circulating typical running temp, with normal factors, if you will, of somewhere around 194 to 203 degrees Fahrenheit. If we're just talking about, no extra heat going through the engine or, stop and go traffic, pushing the engine hard. We're talking about just putting around normal engine type running. Now then, a low temp thermostat's going to open up around 160 degrees, say. It'll be fully open around 167 degrees. So, we're talking about maybe about a 20 degree difference of when it opens. Now then, opening sooner in the process, is 160 even fully warmed up for the engine? And we've talked before, we want that engine starting to get some good heat in it before we push the engine too hard, start adding a lot of load, because we want all the temps to come up evenly in the engine. So I don't really see a big advantage there to going with a low temp versus the normal one. For normal day-to-day driving, where the advantage would be is, typically our running temps are going to be somewhere around 180 to 190 with a low temp thermostat versus around 195 to 200, 205. So probably maybe a little bit of an advantage there. But once we start pushing the engine and really adding load and kind of driven it the way it's meant to be driven, we're going to see temps exceed that anyway. And so it's not going to matter whether you have a low temp thermostat or a normal thermostat. It's going to be well above that mark. It's not unusual to see water temps get up into the 220s, especially with like stop and go traffic in warmer weather and warmer climates. The actual, when the engine reaches 247 degree water temp, is when it will actually flag it and say, hey, the engine's too hot, you need to do something. And so, generally we want to see engine temps water temps below 230, below 220 is ideal, but in some track especially if running street engines on track, generally that's the kind of the worst case scenario. On a dedicated track car or race car, we can pull those front condensers off, we can pull the front fans off, we can even remove the wheel well liners, and that allows the radiators to really maximize airflow and drop those cooling, those coolant temps the most. But when we're when we leave all that on, all those comforts and the air conditioning and whatnot, and then we take that car on track, it's tough to keep the temps below kind of that 225 mark. Now then, some people might think, well, wait a second. At what temperature does water boil? And does that play a factor in here, right? Well, water boils at 212 degrees Fahrenheit at sea level. Now then, two factors come into play in an engine and why that doesn't apply. One is the more pressure we put on the system, the higher the temperature can go before it boils. And so that's why typically radiator caps are going to add anywhere, from a half bar to a bar of pressure on the system and raise that boiling point. And then the other thing is we typically, on track, we typically run, a straight water mix or a water/water wetter mix. But the 50/50 coolant that's used in most cases, again, that's going to raise that boiling temp. So, if I've got the boiling point of, say if I'm running 50/50 coolant and I've got an extra bar over atmosphere, an extra 14 psi of pressure in the system, that takes my boiling point from 212 up to 207 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's why it's not really kind of at play when we're talking about car engines. So I guess the bottom line is, yeah, the low temp thermostats are nice. We use them on all of our builds, but it's really kind of, negligible advantages in my opinion.
For the last question of the night, I thought this question was pretty interesting. When buying a used Porsche, how important is it to scope the cylinders before purchasing? What can the inspection reveal, and what risks are buyers taking if they skip it?
That is an excellent question, and this will be our deep dive subject of the day for sure. And it's really, it's timely. It's one that I've been wanting to address and dive into. First off, yes, definitely get the car bore scoped or perform a bore scope yourself prior to purchasing. And here's why. This is an issue that has been heavily marketed by one of the vendors out there. And so it's on the forefront of everyone's mind, and there's going to be a price reduction on a bore scored engine typically. And so by having it bore scoped in the beginning, even if there's no actual symptoms of bore scoring showing, it is good to know that it exists, and that way you're not taking the hit when you go to sell it, if you go to sell it and it's found out at that point. So yes, bore scope the engine. What are the issues that can develop from an engine with bore scoring? Excessive oil use can be an issue. It's not the only thing that causes excessive oil use, but it is one of them. You can get some smoke at startup. You can get excessive blow-by. And so it can develop into issues. However, generally, the bore scoring has to become fairly advanced before that happens. And a lot of times by that point, you'll also hear a pronounced ticking. Now then, ticking is almost its own subject. These are very ticky engines. And I'll say if it continues up past, say, 12 or 1300 RPMs, a lot of times that ticking noise may be an issue. Not always, but generally that may be a sign. And so just a few things on that. Now then, one of the reasons why I think that not as many engines are bore scoped as could be is because of the debate, should I bore scope from the bottom or should I bore scope from the spark plug holes? And the answer is a resounding, the proper way to bore scope an engine is through the spark plug holes. And we'll go a little bit deeper and kind of look at that, and we can see why the concept that these engines should be bore scoped from the bottom is unique to our community. I don't know of any other engine community where that is even considered. The proper way to borescope an engine has always been through the spark plug holes. Like I said, we'll look a little deeper and show why. Now then, the one caveat is that the borescope will almost always lie to an extent. And what I mean by that is it's always going to look worse on a borescope than it really is. And so we are going to first go ahead and borescope an engine before it's been torn down, and we can talk about a few little techniques to make it a little bit easier. Now then, we're going to be borescoping an engine on a stand. It is a little bit harder if it's in the car, but the concepts remain. Go ahead and take the screws out of the coils, pull the coils, take the spark plugs out, open up all 6 holes, and then that allows you to find essentially bottom dead center 3 times, because cylinders 1 and 4 will line up and can be scoped at the same time, and then you advance to cylinders 2 and 5, they'll be lined up and can be scoped at the same time, and then 3 and 6 in that order will line up for you and allow you to scope them. Why don't we go scope a few cylinders and get a feel for it, and then we'll come back and we can look at the engine after it's been torn down and see what we were seeing.
Let's go do that.
All right, let's go. So the best place to borescope an engine is through the spark plug holes. That gives you the best view of the entire cylinder. If there's any bore scoring started, you're going to see it there. First, you'll want to pull the coils and the plugs. You don't need to disconnect the coils necessarily. You can typically pull them out and set them to the side. If you do need to disconnect them, go ahead and pull the boot off and then pull the clip. Trying to get the clip on and off with the boot is very not fun. And then you'll rotate the crankshaft pulley always clockwise until cylinder 1 and 4 are at bottom dead center. Now then, you can typically see that with the camera, but if you're rotating it, and this one's already rotated down, if you're rotating it with the camera in the hole to see it, make sure that the camera's not all the way in. You want it back just a little bit so that that piston cannot crush that camera. Ask me how I know. That's a mistake you only make once. And so we've got this one rotated. This particular borescope has a side view, and so we're going to turn it to the side view. Now then, this is one we get a lot of questions about. You can see this gray line running through here. That is actually part of the casting process. If you were to zoom on that, you would see that that's nothing more than a collection of silicone particles in the casting. And so then we'll come in here, and first we'll start with the borescope to the downside. Now then, on cylinders 4, 5, and 6, down is the non-thrust side. And so typically that looks pretty good, but you can see we see some lines and some streaks along here. And I got a little bit of debris as well. And so that's the bottom side of the cylinder there. And you can kind of see what we're really looking for is the reflections of the line. There's always going to be lines going up and down, but do they actually... Can we see if there's any depth to them? And it's kind of hard to do. The borescope always makes things look worse than they are. And then if we turn it up to the top side, this is the one we're really worried about. If there's going to be any significant bore scoring, it's typically going to be on 4, 5, and 6 on the thrust face or the top side. And here, that's what we're looking at there. And typically... not really seeing much depth as I drag my line across it. And so I would say this is more superficial, but we'll get in and get to look a little bit more later. All right. And then we're going to come over here and do 1 right after we do 4. And the reason for that is that whenever 4 is at bottom dead center, so is 1. So we can do both cylinders at the same time. And coming here, I'm going to start on the non-thrust side again. So on cylinder 1, the non-thrust face is up. And so I'm going to look at the up part first. And you can see here we have another one of those casting lines we were talking about earlier. I'm not really, that looks pretty good in general. I'm not seeing anything there. And then I'm going to flip it around to the bottom side and go up and down here. And once again, that one looks pretty clean. You can see a few marks in here. Some people call that scoring if they looked at a borescope. But as I'm running my light across those lines, I'm not seeing any depth in them. Maybe just a little bit on that one. Okay, and then we're going to repeat the same process for the other 4 cylinders. So I'm going to move over to cylinder 2, rotate this, make sure my bore camera is not in the hole. I'm going to wait till it should pause briefly when it gets to the very bottom. There we go. Just kind of that brief pause is all we're looking for. That lets us know we're at the bottom. And then I'm going to check my orientation so I know if I'm looking at thrust or non-thrust. And once again, the light's pointed up. So that's non-thrust side on 1 through 3. And here we can definitely see quite a few marks. Which is unusual on the non-thrust side of cylinder 2. But we'll get in there and take a closer look and see what that actually means. I'm not seeing a ton of depth to it once again. Now then we'll flip it over. This engine's a little bit unusual. It looks a little rougher than what we'll see a lot of times. And so this one, if you look in the light, so this is a good example of where we are seeing some scoring. You can see, like on this line right here with the way the shadow is, you can see that line's actually got some depth in it. So that would be one that I was concerned about, and there's a few more here. It's when you can start seeing shadow on one side of the line and light on the other, and it moves as you move the camera. That's what we would consider more typical of bore scoring. And so I would call this early stage. It does have some depth. It is pronounced all the way across. What is late stage bore scoring, where we really see the issue, we'll see if this engine has it. It looks like a cat has clawed up the side of the cylinder. So moving over to the non-thrust face, cylinder 5, we're seeing quite a bit of depth on these marks. And so that's some pretty significant scoring mark. If you look, this one in particular, that's got depth and width. Typically something like that is going to be from debris in the engine. That's not going to be from typical bore scoring that we would see. But yeah, all along here, this is fairly scored, and it's on the bottom side. So this engine's seen some debris. This is not typical for what we would see with a regular bore scoring engine. This one's actually in pretty bad shape. And so if we look at the top side here, this is going to be the thrust side on number 5, thrust face. It's not as bad, maybe, but once again, as I move my light back and forth across that cylinder, I'm seeing depth. It's a little strange. It seems to come and go a little bit. Once again, that's going to be more typical of debris than just standard bore scoring. But this is, there's definitely some scoring on this cylinder. And then we'll rotate it one more time to check out 3 and 6. And there we go. That's a little pause we're looking for. And this bore scope, I think, was $65 off Amazon. I really kind of like these. The big thing is that need to make sure that it has 2 cameras on it so that we can get a side view with them. Now I'm going to look and see which way my light's pointing so I can orient. Just to stay consistent, we're going to start with the upside on cylinder 3. And on this one, we're seeing quite a few marks. Some of them have depth to them. You can see that one, that one, that one. Those all kind of, I can see a shadow on the side as I'm moving my light and drawing it around. So that tells me that it's got depth to it. And then here we're seeing some pretty good streaking. I just picked this core engine at random that we were starting to tear apart, not knowing if I'd see any bore scoring or not, and it seems to be a worst case scenario. See this right here? Not only do I have depth, but look at the size of that pock mark where that scoring starts. Once again, this is an engine that's had quite a bit of debris in it, so this is not going to be caused by any type of flaking of the piston wall or anything. This is going to be debris-induced bore scoring. And then coming over to cylinder 6, our final cylinder. As expected, consistent with the others. Once again, we've got quite a bit of scoring. I would still call this somewhat early stage in that, I mean, it's pretty bad, but it's not taking over the entire side of the cylinder wall, so you're going to get some oil through these cracks. It's not ideal. I mean, this engine needs rebuilt. I mean, it was bought as a bad engine, and this one's definitely, I mean, I would not consider running this one any further. But one thing that I do kind of look at is when there is scoring on a cylinder, how much actual width across the cylinder. If I've got 1 score mark or 2 score marks, I mean, that's going to be less than 0.1% of the cylinder wall that's got some depth to it. Yeah, you'll use a little bit of oil over time, but generally nothing significant. It's when you start seeing, more than that you'll have symptoms go along with it. So interestingly, the thrust face of cylinder 6 looks pretty good. You can see these marks here, but they're more, maybe we've got 1 or 2 with a little depth to it. Good being obviously, relative to the other cylinders, but I'm not seeing as much actual scoring. I'm seeing more scuffing of the liner wall than I am actually depth from scoring on this. So interestingly enough, this engine's getting ready to get torn down, so we'll take another look at it later and be able to compare kind of what we see on the bore scope to what's actually there when we can get a much better look at it. So one thing I did want to kind of do as as an honorable mention is one other place you can go through is the plug hole in the front that's used for the piston pin insertion on cylinders 4, 5, and 6. You can actually go through there and get a view at the underside of 4, 5, and 6. And so it's gives a little bit of extra information. It's not something that I think is necessarily required, but there is going to be a little different view. So if I turn this down, I'm looking at the thrust side of 4, and it does let me see some of the bottom of the cylinder. You can't get to it quite as well, but we'll compare this to the top side that we saw of the cylinder and just see how much value does it add to be at the bottom versus the top. Okay, so what'd you think of the bore scoping process, Ricardo?
That was pretty interesting, and it is super valuable to do that if you're going to buy a car. So I'm taking a lot of information from this one.
All right, so I know there's going to be some people that look at those bore scope images and go, mild scoring, like early stage scoring, like you're crazy, like that looks horrible. And that goes back to the caveat of, well, yeah, it looks bad, but how bad is it really? And so that's where there's value of taking these case halves. We've now got them cleaned up a little bit, and let's look and see what we've actually got. We can run our finger across there and see where there's actually some depth to the scoring as opposed to just being some surface scuffs, and we can see what it looks like.
Let's do it.
So let's start over here on cylinders 1, 2, and 3. And so here's our thrust face on cylinders 1, 2, and 3. And cylinder 3, we can see some marks there. Cylinder 2, cylinder 1, and cylinder 1 looks pretty clean. But now then, I want you to run your finger across these and tell me how many of those marks you can actually feel either with your finger or with your fingernail.
Yeah, let's see. Yeah, I can hardly feel it on number 1. And surprisingly, I can hardly feel that as well. Number 3. I mean, I can hardly feel that. But yeah. 3 is definitely...
Would you say 3 is the worst?
Definitely.
Okay, and so if I run my fingernail across there, man, it's just not grabbing anything, right? Like, and so at the end of the day, yes, we have scuffed off kind of that first layer of the cylinder coating, but that's not actually scoring. Like, there's no depth. I think I felt depth on maybe 1 or 2 of these lines, and that was about it. Like, there's no real scoring on these. It's just kind of some scuffing on the top. Once again, I feel right there where we've got one line that some debris has been dragged up and down. On this one, like I said, taking my fingernail and just seeing anything that even catches my nail in the slightest bit. And we just don't have anything. So as bad as these looked in the scope, where we were even seeing where we could see the light even shining a little bit, but when you go to actually look at them, there's not much there. So once again, the scope always makes it look a lot worse than it really is. Now let's look on this other side where I think we do have a little bit of scoring. So we did see where 5 was the worst. Now then, this is our non-thrust side. And so we'll start at 6 here. Not really feeling anything there. 5. Oh yeah, okay. We can start to really kind of feel it there. 4, nothing there. And kind of on this back side here, once again, nothing on 4. 5, maybe a little bit on the thrust side. Maybe just a bit. And then again on 6. And so out of all of those marks that we looked at, there's only actual scoring in one place, and that's the non-thrust side on 5. This is actually developed to a point where, you know, if this was an engine that we were running and doing data on, I think, you know, interestingly, just kind of scratching it with my fingernails, making the actual score marks show up a little bit better. But this would be early stage scoring, because what happens is yeah, I can definitely feel that. Right? Like, it's a big difference when the scoring actually happens. And this is early stage. We've seen it a lot worse than this. And that's when we start seeing symptoms such as the high oil consumption or even smoking out of the engine. But it's got to get pretty bad for that to happen. And so I think most shops are going to fail 5 or 6 of these cylinders on both sides potentially, when actually it's only one side of one cylinder has actual early stage bore scoring. Now then, would we be able to see any of this? You know, is there any of this that we wouldn't see from the top that we would see from the bottom? And I think that that's another important question. And so let's go ahead and throw a piston in here. We'll measure it out, get it at the right height, and let's see how much of the cylinder we would be missing, you know, if we scoped it from the top and didn't scope it from the bottom. Okay, so to start with, I put a piston in here at top dead center. And so typically that's going to be about 30 thou is what's called the quench area. And about 33 right there. So that's almost right on target. And the quench area is between this little top pad here and the head, and that's to essentially prevent knocking is what that does. If you get the quench just right, if you get the quench wrong, you have too much quench, not enough quench, that can cause issues. But that's where that takes place. And so as you can see, while this is almost at the very top, if you look at these rings around these others, so that's going to be the ring line and how far up the rings actually come and stop. So that's essentially, at the very top of the stroke. Now then, what we're looking at when we take the piston to bottom dead center is this minus 82.8 millimeters. And so we'll set that up as well, and let's see how much of the cylinder we can actually see at that point. So we've positioned this piston in the cylinder, and it's right at about 83.4, so that's going to be that 82.8 plus 30 thou is essentially 3/4 of a millimeter. So that's going to be almost spot dead on as to where bottom dead center is going to be. And so let's go ahead and take a line. I'll take a marker and we'll draw around that and see, what's going to be visible to us. So we've used the piston to mark in the bore what we would be able to see from the top side. And let's take a look. So here's our scoring surface. Here, the bottom of this blue line is pretty much where the piston was at bottom dead center. So as you can see, we can see well over, 3/4 of the actual scoring from the top side. And so, I believe that, the having it, not only is having it scoped from the bottom more expensive, you can't get to all the cylinders. It actually can be intimidating for a lot of mechanics that aren't familiar with these. Like, I think it's the reason more cylinders aren't scoped. And as you can see, one thing all bore scoring has in common, it goes up and down the cylinder. And when the cylinder's at bottom dead center, we can see the vast majority of any scoring that's taking place. So there's really no need to ever scope from the bottom. Scoping through the spark plug hole is the proper way to scope an engine. And that's not just me saying it. It's not just me showing you why it is, but also if you go to any ASE certification class, the professionals are going to tell you that as well. So Ricardo, what do you think? Did you learn anything today?
I did. I learned a lot. The importance of getting your vehicle inspected, as you purchase it, top or bottom, being able to see the amount that you get to see from the top and bottom really puts it into perspective as to which one is better and as well easier to do. And then the lightweight flywheel was also pretty interesting to see the difference in weight and getting to learn about all that. So could this be the best episode? I think so. It's going to make it hard for us for the future episodes, but that is the exciting part of getting to do this. So yeah. I'm curious as to what the future episodes will bring.
And we did the low-key drop on the
the 4.5,
the 4.5 liter.
Yeah, that's going to be insane to see. Being here and getting to see all the measurements that have to happen from taking out the cases to be able to reinforce them with the closed deck technology. And then what that means for the sleeves and the measurement with the pistons in the sleeves to see which one fits better. It's just all been really a lot, considering I've only been here for 3 months. But I kind of sound like I know what I'm talking about a little bit. You know what I mean?
You've done great, yeah. And I do need to do special mentions of Barry Hart and Brian Potter specifically on, we've been working on that 4.5 liter design for quite a while now, and just finalized it within the last month and started getting some of the special custom billet long lead time pieces on order. We actually discovered that a 4.6 liter is possible,
really?
But there's going to be a lot of work into making the 4.5, and so the extra work to go from 4.5 to 4.6 kind of decided probably isn't worth it at this point in time. And so that's why I think, as far as what's the maximum capacity for these engines, it's 4.5 isn't max, but I think it's definitely going to be a sweet spot. It's an engineering challenge, but we've worked through all of those issues, and we're still within proper design parameters to do it. And so, you know, I'm sure we'll learn a little bit in the process of actually doing it, but I'm excited about that one.
Oh, there's so much to be excited about. You know, you announced that you're going to do a 4.5, and then someone will come knocking saying, can we put a turbo on it? And then it's going to be like, oh my gosh, like that's another kind of worms that we kind of don't want to open right now. But yeah, that's something to be excited about. So
yeah.
Super.
And truthfully, I mean, the answer to that's probably yes. You know, it all goes back to the, you know, Hartech essentially taking, you know, the best parts of the Metzger engine and adapting them over to the M9X engine is really the heart of everything that we do, and allows us to continue to expand on what they've done and push the limits even further.
Wow. Well, it's like you say, if you can measure it, yeah, you can make it better.
Measure it, you can improve it.
Yeah, for real. Yeah, that's awesome. So, when people ask me, what do? You know, who do you work for? I was like, I work for this guy who says he takes Porsches and makes them better.
Don't tell Porsche that. They may take exception, but no, it's a lot of fun. It's my passion. It's what I love to do. And so just cannot have to pinch myself every day just having the opportunity to do it.
Yeah, and then being able to put it out there how we are makes me excited, and it should make everyone else excited, as they're going to get to see the journey to 4.5.
Yeah.
So that's what a bombshell to drop here.
Yeah, and you know, well, like I said, we're only going to do 3 of them over the next year. It'll be kind of a special edition, if you will. The 4.1 will remain our flagship engine. It's, you know, I love that engine. It's so versatile. We've been able to continue to push it further and further, and there's so much we can do with it. And then even the 3.9s for the 996.1s, like I'm really happy with how that engine's progressing. We can do a 4.1 on a 996.1, but it's a lot of extra work to kind of update all the internals to the 997 internals, whereas the 3.9 seems to be the sweet spot for that engine, and we're going to keep pushing on it, and to where, you know, it's also quite a bit lighter than the .2 and the 997, so we don't have to get quite as much horsepower out of it to make it feel really special. And so that's, you know, being a 996 guy myself, that one's pretty important to me, so I'm real happy that that's happening as well.
How do you feel now that we're getting close to putting out our 100th engine? What does that mean to you?
I think it's a milestone. I think, you know, goes back to having to pinch myself every day. You know, it's like having 100 children out there, you know, off on their own, kind of doing their own thing. And, you know, so once again, I'm kind of a nervous guy, so I stay pretty nervous about them. And, you know, not 100% of them are, some of them are whining a little more than others. But generally, you know, out of that 100, we've only had actually 3 come back for, because of essentially something that we overlooked, or a mistake that we made, or something that wasn't even our fault on one of them, but, it's still covered under our warranty. So I think what I would call a 3% failure rate is something that I'm really proud of at this point.
Yeah, considering that, some people use them on the street, some people use them on track, some people do both. 3% is great. And that 100th engine, I feel lucky enough to have been able to come in and literally see that engine come in, get broken down, cleaned, measured, and now get put back together, dynoed, and heck, it's getting installed and we're covering that too. So being able to cover that from beginning to end, and even me getting to put my little bit of my grain of sand into that project, it feels good. So I'm lucky enough to have been here for that too.
That's awesome. So,
well, I think that's a good place to leave it. Is there anything else you want to leave us with?
I'd say just, drive hard, wrench smart, and I'll see you at the finish line.
Thank you guys for watching. If you guys appreciate the information, find it valuable, a like and a subscription goes a long way as we try to get to 100,000. I'm putting it out there. I'm going to speak it to existence. One day we'll have 100,000 subscribers, and you'll see us here celebrating with a nice plaque to show that. So we can only do that by the like and subscribe. So even if you get a little bit of value, give us that in return, and we're always appreciative for every view and comment. As well, if you have any comments, please leave them in the comment section. We go through all of them meticulously and try to learn from every comment we get. So again, thank you guys. This has been another episode of the Slakker Porsche podcast.
I'm Philip. Thanks for watching. If you want to check out another video, check it out right there.